Good morning and welcome to our Future of Work webinar series. We will wait just a moment or two for our colleagues to join us in this virtual auditorium. So we'll be right with you in a moment. Right. Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. This is our sixth and final Future of Work webinar. Today we have From Pandemic Blues to Joy, Start Practicing Positive Emotions. As I mentioned, this is the sixth and final session as we transition back to on-site work. However, all of the prior sessions are available in recording, and we'll put that in the chat, so feel free to bookmark that. And you or your colleagues can watch those previous recordings at any time. So very happy to have you. This is a webinar format. So while our host and our speaker and myself, you can see us, we cannot see you. So you'll notice the Q&A box at the bottom there versus the chat box that's active. So feel free to submit your questions during the session, and we'll try to get to as many of them as time allows. Now, first, I'd like to introduce our host for today. We're very fortunate to have Dr. Douglas Haynes, our Vice Chancellor of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, hosting our session today. So Doug, can you please tell us a little bit about yourself and what interests you about this particular topic?
Pamela, thank you so much for inviting me and having me host. Well, I'm a UCI employee. I'm a professor of history. Believe it or not, this is my 29th year, but it seems like yesterday. And in my role as Vice Chancellor for Equity and Diversity and Inclusion, I really provide campus leadership, really to promote values around diversity, equity, and inclusion for the whole enterprise. It matters to us here as much as it matters to our employees, our patients at the UC Medical Center. I can't think of a better topic for the final installment of this series than practicing positive emotions for a variety of reasons. One is that we're returning to work and learning for the first time after nearly 18 months for the vast majority of employees and many of our students and faculty. We've gone through a lot. And my experience, if it's like anyone else's, I'm learning a lot about myself. I'm processing what that experience has been like. Is it making me better? Am I changing? How can I help other people? It matters in another way because wellness represents one of the three pillars of the Inclusive Excellence Action Plan. The other two are thriving and community. And it seems to me that this series combines all three: community, thriving, and wellness. And I'm particularly delighted to be here because I get to introduce a colleague, Dr. Belinda Campos. For those of you who don't know, Dr. Campos is professor and chair of the Department of Chicano Latino Studies at UCI, as well as an affiliate faculty member in the School of Medicine for the program PrimeLC, that refers to primary care in the Latino community, and the Department of Psychological Science. Dr. Campos studies factors that promote high quality relationships with a particular focus on understanding how social cultural context shapes relationship experiences in ways that benefit health. The findings of our work show that the sociological context, the social cultural context that emphasize prioritizing others before the self can be beneficial for relationships and protective of health. This work has been recognized for generating novel insights that advance scientific understanding of culture, positive emotions, relationships, and the link of relationships with health. Please join me in welcome Dr. Campos. Good afternoon.
Campos, you're muted.
That's the way we start things in 2020. But now it's 2021. So thank you so much for that wonderful invitation. I'm really glad to be here with you all today, and I hope that you find today's presentation useful. So I want to start today with a video that captures one person's feelings about work. This is from the original Wonder Years, but FYI, there's a new Wonder Years reboot, and it's been getting very positive reviews. So bear with me as I want to show you this particular video.
Dan, have you ever thought about your life?
Huh?
Oh, well, it's for school. I mean, if you read about it, what would you say?
Okay, time for a meaningful father-son exchange here. A thoughtful summing up. I get up at 5 in the morning. I fight traffic. I bust my hump all day. I fight traffic again. And I come home. Then I pay my taxes. The end. In a way, it kind of made you feel like you knew the guy.
Oof. So that is how one person feels about their work. And that was long before the time of the COVID. But what is the question that I want to think about today is what's relevant today? What's the hope for what's possible today in terms of how we might feel in our lives and in our work lives in particular? So work, especially work, it's one aspect of our very multifaceted lives, but we spend a lot of time there. So how do we cultivate the positive? And I think that to wrap our heads around that, it's helpful to first get oriented to what emotions are and how they work. So these days, it seems that when we talk about emotions, we talk in terms of emojis that we send each other, but emotions are actually, there are formal specifics, and emotions are distinct, biologically based psychological entities. They're characterized by short-lived patterns of perception, experience, physiology, things happen in our bodies, and communicative action. In very central ways, emotions are social, and they are evoked and they unfold in response to specific challenges and opportunities in our social environments, and often in social contexts like work. So emotions involve feelings, moments of feelings, feelings of varying intensities. They involve behaviors like facial actions, the movements that our face makes, that our face muscles make. They involve voice changes and social behaviors like whether we're hugging or whether we're getting ready to aggress against somebody. And they fall into distinct categories. They make us want to approach and get closer to others, or they make us want to avoid something and get away from something. They can make us feel warm, or they can make us feel cold. Emotions are, at all times, personally significant. They are not evoked by just anything. They're evoked by the things that matter specifically to our individual self. Okay, so emotions are distinct, biologically based psychological entities characterized by these short-lived patterns of perception, experience, physiology, and communicative action. They're social, we said, and they're evoked and they unfold in response to specific challenges and opportunities. Emotions are also goal relevant. They're either, we feel them when things are goal congruent, when we're meeting our goals and getting stuff done that we want to get done, or when things are goal incongruent, when we have thwarted goals. And as we can see, when we have goal congruence, when we're meeting our goals, we tend to feel positive emotions. And when our goals are being thwarted, when they are incongruent, then we start to feel negative emotions. Today, we're focusing on the positive emotions, but I want to be clear that it's important to leave room for all the emotions. Cultivating and practicing the positive does not mean striving to only have positive emotions. It means aiming to make space for the positive and finding ways to let the positive help us manage through the negative. Okay, So the link to our goals brings us to positive emotions or negative emotions. And so when things are goal congruent, when we're meeting our tasks, what kind of emotions do we feel? Why are they important? There's many reasons why positive emotions are important, and I bet some of them are pretty obvious to you. First of all, emotions are rewarding and of good consequence in their own right. Whether we're doing something fun and exciting or celebrating a major achievement or caregiving and sharing a giggle with a loved one, emotions feel good and they're rewarding in their own right. Positive emotions are also important undoers of negative emotion. They help us to recover from negative emotions. In a classic set of studies, people were first induced to feel negative emotions like anger or fear. You're exposed to a stimuli that makes you angry or a stimuli that makes you fearful. And then your heart is monitored during that time because the heart responds to emotions, right? And the take-home message of all of these studies is that after being induced to feeling negative emotion, be that anger, sadness, or fear, those who were given the opportunity to view films that induced positive emotion actually exhibited more rapid returns to the levels of cardiovascular activity that they had before they were brought into negative emotion. So positive emotions help us recover when negative feelings have been felt. And there are a number of psychological theories that bring about other things that maybe are less obvious, but that are just as rewarding about positive emotion. Positive emotions, when we feel them, help us think in broader terms. They help us think more creatively, more out of the box thinking. When we share positive emotion with others through a process that psychologists call capitalization, and others respond in positive ways to our positive news, then you start to engage in mutual spirals of positive emotion, and you increase the likelihood that you and others around you are feeling positive emotion. So, okay, rewarding in their own right, important undoers of negative emotion, and capable of helping to bring about creative thinking and evoking positive relationship spirals. So what are some of the specifics about positive emotions that can help us get these gains? So I want to talk about 4 specific positive emotions that I think can be really helpful in helping you make the most out of the possibilities of positive emotion. The first is joy. Joy is a very specific emotion term. It's really the term that psychological scientists use for happiness, which is a more generic term. That's because we tend to use happiness in society like really broadly. We use it in a lot of different ways. So it's better to get more specific. And so to focus in specifically on moments of joy. So joy, it's a high arousal, positive state. You feel really good and you feel it's more like excited, enthusiastic. You have high levels of positive arousal. And it's characterized by the urge to play and to be playful with others. And importantly, it facilitates exploration because we feel safe, and it facilitates exploration and skill acquisition. We're sort of poised to learn new things. And joy can be sparked by many things: good news, photos of loved ones, winning at something. You'll see that at the bottom of this, I have a little visual from the movie Inside Out. I don't know if you've seen it, but if you haven't, I highly recommend it. I think it has a really nice depiction of what joy is and the many ways that it can be sparked. Another positive emotion that is perhaps more directly relevant to work in the workplace is interest. Interest is sparked by novelty, and we feel it when we ascertain that there's something novel and challenging in the environment, but that the challenge is manageable. We're not overwhelmed by it. It's something that we think we can grasp and are able to learn. So when we encounter this novelty and this sense of challenge, it evokes curiosity and exploration and information seeking. And studies have shown that when we're evoked into interest, when we feel interest, we go for more challenging kinds of information. For example, we're more likely to choose more complicated figures to look at in terms of our visual attention. We find things like complex poems more interesting than more simple poems, and we give our visual attention to things longer than and to complex things longer than we otherwise would when we're not interested. So I think interest is one of those emotions that we definitely want to think about cultivating in the workplace. And then there's pride. Pride is a little bit different from other emotions. It's more complex. Pride can be thought of as a self-conscious emotion. It's really relevant to status. So as you can see, we don't in our everyday lives like display it in this way of the visual that I'm showing you. This is the very typical pride display that you would very commonly see in things like the Olympics or other kinds of competition where, you know, somebody's definitely winning and somebody's definitely losing. But pride is something that is well cultivated for its pro-social side. So let me explain that in a sec. So pride can be what psychological scientists call good pride, is achievement oriented, but it's more pro-socially oriented. It's more about what the team perhaps has achieved or how the good things that you've achieved do good for the others around you. And is something that you've earned through work rather than something that you just carry with you because of where you might have been born or what you might have lucked into. And this kind of good pride is correlated with adaptive traits. And so it's a good thing to have and a good thing to feel. Less positive pride, bad pride, is still achievement oriented, but it's not as pro-social. It's more about feeling good about the achievement, but in a way that your elevated status gives you an opportunity to maybe not treat so well people of lower status. So that's not necessarily the kinds of pride that we want to cultivate. It's more correlated with aggression and with hostility. And then on the other side of pride, an unmitigated good, because pride, like I said, it's a little bit more self-focused. It's more about your achievement. Gratitude, when we recognize the beneficial actions that other people have taken in one's life, gratitude is especially potent and it's other focused. So one reason that positive emotions make us feel good is that they shift our focus away from the self, away from me and my problems, and onto others. And gratitude is one of the key emotions that has been shown to do that. It helps put the self in its balanced place of not being absolutely the highest, most top priority thing on your to-do list, and helps you to empathize and see how you're connected to others and in which ways relationships can be affirmed and maintained. So gratitude, specifically when we feel it, can help us focus on the joys that relationships can bring. And it has been shown to create and to affirm bonds. Okay, so what signals positive emotions? How do we communicate them to others? It's complex, of course, but one surefire signal of positive emotion is something called the Duchenne Smile. So here in the visual that I have, you'll see on one side is Dr. Duchenne. That's who the smile is named for. And Dr. Duchenne was working with a patient who actually had varying levels of facial paralysis. So this was a person who couldn't voluntarily move their facial muscles, but who could, with a little bit of electrical stimulation, be provoked into moving the muscles. This didn't hurt the participant. They, as I said, they had a facial paralysis, and so they didn't really feel things that were happening in their facial muscles. But what Dr. Duchenne discovered and what's named for him is that there was a particular kind of smile that was recognized by others as communicating positive emotionality. It's called the Duchenne Smile. It's the smile that is most associated with joy, with positive feelings, with felt pleasure. And it's central to various kinds of positive emotion experience. So here, I think, is a clear signal of America Ferrera on the day that she won her Golden Globe, feeling positive emotion and signaling it to others. As you can see, her Duchenne smile is evident through the wide open-mouthed smile, but also through, you might notice that there is some crinkling around her eyes. Now, in everyday life, we don't necessarily attend to others in this really careful way of saying like, oh, is that smile, completely real? Are there eyes crinkling in the eyes? No. We don't pay attention at that level. All of this happens on a more momentary basis. But humans are actually really good at detecting these Duchenne smiles and as finding them to be indicators of like felt positivity and reward. So people who show Duchenne smiles more frequently get the rewards of probably being better liked. Evidence shows of having higher levels of mental health. So if you have smiles to give and real smiles to give them, because it's good for you and it's good for others to see them and to receive them. So, okay, short of winning a Golden Globe, which doesn't happen every day, how can we cultivate positive emotions? Cultivating positive emotions can be, I think, challenging, or it can be easy. So one of the reasons why I wanted to make sure that we leave a lot of time for the Q&A for today is because, as I said, emotions are really personally meaningful. And so it depends on like who you are and where you're at. For some of us, positive emotions come easy. For some of us, positive emotions are harder to come by because either we're just not that kind of person naturally, or because the things that we've lived through make it harder to feel positive emotions. But there are things that you can do to cultivate positive emotions. The first thing that you can do is bring some joy. Capitalize on the good. When someone shares good news, even small things, it's important to respond with what's called active, constructive enthusiasm. Be happy for other people. It's a way to make the most of positive emotions. There's a great deal of research that shows that when people share good news with others, even little kinds of good news, and like I had a great day, or I found $1 on the sidewalks, small things, that when you share good news with somebody and the other person responds by being enthused and happy for you, that creates these spirals of positive emotion. Being happy for others is correlated with psychological health, with strong and stable relationships, and with being able to resolve conflict more effectively and with less strain and stress on the people. So capitalizing on when something good happens and being able to share it with others is a wonderful way to make the most of positive emotionality for yourself and the people around you. And it's so good for your relationships and so good for your mental health. And I want to give you an idea of what active constructive enthusiasm shows like. So if somebody says to you, oh, you know, today I made something for dinner and it came out, you know, particularly good, blah, 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 or I got a gift from somebody, oh, you know, that's great news. I got an A on a test. What you don't want to do is make less of what other people's good news is. And you don't want to do something that's called active destructive, which is like point out other better things that could have happened. That's actually a way to do the opposite of not creating positive emotions, but of diminishing them for everybody. And it's not necessarily good for relationships. So an example that I can think of that I frequently use in my classes is a student a long time ago shared that they had just gotten into law school and they had gotten into a prestigious law school, and they were trying to share that news with their mother. And they wanted to say, hey, you know, I got into this prestigious law school. And their mother could have given an active, constructive response. Oh my gosh, that's wonderful news. So proud of you, yada, yada, yada. But instead, that parent couldn't find it in themselves to give that active, constructive response. They said, well, if you got into that prestigious institution, doesn't it make you wish that you had applied to this other prestigious institution too, because you might have gotten into that? And that is what's called an active, destructive response. Instead of taking your good news and having it make a spiral of positive emotion for the two of you, you've taken somebody's good news and made less of it so that they feel less good and you don't feel good about that either. So when somebody brings you good news, share the joy and respond with active, constructive enthusiasm. Number 2, cultivate interest, engage with others. Go ahead and try to seek out some novelty. See if it can meet your particular criteria for what's challenging without being overwhelming or too boring, because when things are not challenging, it's not necessarily evoking of interest either. And then express the interest, and then find that it opens up curiosity and exploration and brings connection to others. In terms of pride, I think you can feel good about your achievements. It's okay, but focus perhaps on its more pro-social side, so that maybe it's more of a shared experience. Especially, I think, in the workplace, we might think about the kind of team accomplishments that we have, or meeting the goals that might make us a better environment to be in. So I think that thinking about group pride in these contexts in the workplace can be like a really nice way to feel the kind of pride that is associated with pro-social consequences and with mental health. And then there's gratitude. Can't leave out gratitude. Remind yourself of the things to be thankful for and express appreciation to others. Be liberal with your expressions of appreciation. There's a lot of research that shows that even if you are just writing down in the morning for yourself, like 2 or 3 things that you are thankful for or that you feel good about, that can be like really beneficial for your mental health and for your physical health. So what's important about that, though, side note and tip, is don't try to make the list too long. If you try to make the list too long, then you're starting to give yourself the opportunity to run out of things to be thankful for. And that's not what you want. You want to have 2 or 3 things that come readily to mind and that make you feel good and that you can benefit from and use to go those upward spirals of positive emotions. So across the different emotions, you'll notice that I've emphasized focusing on others more than the self. And that's because that's consistent with evidence that focusing on others, especially, can be really good for us in the context of positive emotions. So positive emotions, joy, interest, pride, and gratitude are part of what helps us to put others before the self, and helping others often makes people feel good. People actually report higher levels of well-being when they're giving to others. And so simply put, focusing on others in a pro-social way can be really good for us. And so the idea of cultivating positive emotions is pretty simple. Just choose one of the emotions, or choose an emotion that I haven't talked about, like awe or amusement can also be useful. And then do a specific action that regularly helps you to evoke it. And as I said, emotions are personally meaningful. So give some time and some thought to thinking about, like, what are the things that make you feel good? What are the things that for you evoke joy and interest and gratitude and pride? When you do choose one of the emotions, you can do a specific action regularly that helps you specifically to evoke it. And that can be as simple as taking the time to notice and appreciate the small things around you, taking a walk around our beautiful Central Park if you're working on campus, or it can be something that can be a little bit more complicated and take more effort on your part, but that is equally rewarding and equally a good thing. And altogether, the things that you do to bring about positive emotions for you can bring those upward spirals of positive feelings that can be so rewarding and so helpful in recovering from the negative, if that's part of what you need. Because as part of my closing thoughts, that's one of the things that I want to say. What about the negative, especially in the face of what we've all just lived through? Negative emotions, sadness in particular, can be a point for learning. One of my most admired colleagues over in the psychological science department has written chapters where she talks about sadness as the architect of cognitive change. Sadness, it can make us think deeply and seek the support of others, and it can prompt major changes that can be the right thing to do in the long run. So as I said before, we want to focus on cultivating the positive, but we don't necessarily want to shy away from the negative. I just want to finish with a reminder to make room for all the feelings. We've lived through a pandemic, and sadness, grief, it's just part of the deal. But there still is, and there still can be, room for joy, room for interest, for pride, and for gratitude. And I hope that today's presentation helps stimulate some thinking that can help you find yours. So that's what I have to say.
Thank you so much, Dr. Campos, for that really interesting presentation about positive emotions. And what I've taken away from it, and I'm going to keep processing it, but you've given a name to things that very often we just don't give a whole lot of attention to. And you show, for example, their connection. And, you know, I have a question, if you don't mind. I want to encourage audience members to share their questions in the Q&A function. But in some sense, cultivating and practicing positive emotions that you described actually helps build a sense of community and belonging.
Absolutely. So, I mean, I really like two things that your comment brings up. The first one is that part of the reason I go out of my way to define emotions in my presentations is that emotions are one of those things that everybody recognizes. Everybody thinks that they know what it is. But then when we sit down to try to define it and get into its specifics, we're a little flummoxed. It's not clear. There's just a lot of feelings, and it's difficult to get into the specifics of them. So I think that that's one of the things that is important as a take-home message from this. The other thing that you bring up is the extent to which positive emotions are relevant to community building. And there's like increasing evidence over the last decade that positive emotions are central to community building. It's what makes us feel connected to others. This is part of the reason to emphasize things like gratitude or to emphasize things like joy, because joy is enhanced when we're with other people. So laughter, for example, there's new research on laughter, which isn't specifically an emotion, but which is linked to when we feel joy, we might laugh. When we feel amusement, we might laugh. When we laugh by ourselves, that laugh is actually behaviorally different than when we laugh with others. Mm-hmm. And when we're in the presence of others, we actually laugh harder and we derive more benefit from it. And we feel connected to the other people who are laughing around us. So, I didn't bring up the amusement example specifically because, future of work, I'm not sure how much of a role there is for amusement, but I think it feeds into these examples of how positive emotions are part of community building. feeling connected with others, feeling that you like somebody enough,
Mhm.
presence rewarding enough that it makes you want to do things that engage in these upward spirals.
Mhm.
Absolutely central to community building.
Thank you for that comment, Dr. Campos, because there's a question that's come in from our audience that I think is very relevant here. They write, one question is, how do we help others who seem to be struggling? I find if I am happy or try to inject a positive story, it does not seem appropriate when the other person is not in a positive place. Any advice?
That's an excellent question. I mean, I can't, I really appreciate this person bringing this up and emphasizing that it's important to read the room. So I've gone out of my way to talk about how we have to make room for all the feelings. We may be focused on cultivating positive emotions, but we have to make room for all the feelings. And one of the challenges that comes with negative feelings, with negative emotions, is that because we live in a culture, in a society, mainstream American society talks about emphasizing the positivity, is that sometimes it's hard to leave room for the negativity. And so people who are in a down space might talk about how others don't want to hear where they're feeling, and others are having a hard time with like the depth of sorrows that they may be feeling, the depth of frustration that they may be feeling. And so what I think is really important is not to invalidate people's feelings, but to let them have their feelings and to acknowledge what they're feeling and why, but then look for other moments. At the time when somebody's sharing the things that make them sad or frustrated, is not the time to bring your happy, joyous moment or to bring your awesome cat meme or silly pet video. But wait for it, wait for your turn. And if you find the person in a space where they've managed to like separate themselves out from those negative feelings, or that they're taking an interest in something, that's a great time for you to come on in with a little bit of interest, a little bit of amusement, a little bit of responding to the things that are rewarding to others, not just the things that are rewarding to yourselves. And in that way, starting those positive emotions and their upward spirals in our relationships.
I really appreciate how you began that response by saying, read the room, as being attentive, being aware, being mindful. And there's a terrific question that really is so important at a community like UCI that is so diverse by many measures of human diversity. And so they write, are there cultural differences in how emotions are expressed and reciprocated?
Oh, I feel like I planted that question, sort of my area of expertise. I didn't emphasize it per se, but I wanted it to come up in the Q&A and to have a chance to talk about it. There are broad things that are true that we all share in common as humans in terms of emotions. And then there's all kinds of things that we do differently based on the many different kinds of diversity that humans have. So one short version that I think is important for this conversation is that we're not all socialized to emphasize positive emotions, and we're not all socialized to emphasize these high arousal positive emotions. So for example, there's work coming out of another psychologist that I greatly admire over at Stanford that highlights how if in East Asian contexts particularly, there is an emphasis on more low level positive emotions, a greater acceptance of negativity, and a greater preference for something like contentment or calm, sort of a preference for a more peaceful emotion. And so if you think about somebody who's been socialized into a background where they don't necessarily have these like really like high enthusiasm positive emotions, then it can be a misfit to ask them to engage in different kinds of emotionality. And I think this goes back to Doug's comment about read the room. We don't all have the same emotion habits. We didn't all grow up with the same expressions. And I think that there's a lot of room to be aware of how other people are feeling and to give the benefit of the doubt, because you don't know, emotions are so personal and so meaningful. If you don't know how somebody is feeling, take the moment to figure out, is it okay to ask? Do they have other people that are close to them or that are friends that are being taken care of? It's not everybody has to share all their feelings with you, but you might be able to check on them and kind of see where they're at in terms of their social environment. And then other psychologists that I admire talk about how in contexts where we're not necessarily socialized to talk about our emotional feelings in the same way, the benefit of that is that if you're socialized to think that emotions are something that you should talk about and put out there, it's very helpful if you talk about them and put them out there. But if you're not socialized, if you don't come from a background that socializes that, then it's not necessarily helpful to you. And it might even be really difficult for you because now you're being put in the uncomfortable position of talking about feelings when that's not the way that you have walked in this world.
Right.
So you want to, I think in this case, not just read the room, but be sensitive to people around you in the sense of, if you can, give other people the benefit of the doubt. If people aren't emoting the emotions that you want them to have, that's okay, let it be. And if it gets to the place where you're worried about somebody's negative emotionality, check and see if they have others around them that they're getting along with in a particular way. Do they have somebody that they're confiding in? Do they have somebody that they're hanging out with? One of the things that the research has shown, at least to be true in the past, of gendered kinds of friendships, for example, is that the friendships of men tend to involve less talking than the friendships of women. And I think that that goes back to the socialization difference that we're talking about, of how much we're socialized into talking about feelings. But what we find amongst those who are not socialized into talking about feelings is that we do well by engaging in activities. You don't have to declare to somebody that you're here to talk about feelings and to be supportive of them in their like time of woe. You can instead just find a moment to like invite them to lunch or invite them to engage in an activity or help them with something small. If they're engaging in a task at work, maybe you can offer to somehow make it easier. And those are the kind of things that they're small, they're appreciated, they bind, and they start those upward spirals of positive emotions, but in a way that is mindful that not all of us are socialized into particular ways of doing emotion. So the way that you think is a natural way to feel in response to something is not everybody's way of feeling emotion.
Dr. Campos, I really appreciate that response, because it strikes me that at the heart of community is creating a sense of belonging. And you really can't have a sense of belonging if we don't know or understand the different communities that make up, in this case, UCI. And so in some sense, is it fair to say that we can enhance, improve, optimize our capacity for promoting positive emotions to the extent that we learn more about each other?
Yes, I think so. I think that there is a lot of good research that shows that when we take interest in others, when we spark interest in others, we not only feel those positive emotions, but we create relational bonds and we become more comfortable with others. You know, one of my favorite studies was about sparking interest in another person's cultural background and having it happen naturally, right? Not necessarily having that be as a formal assignment, but having it just come up as part of like the course of conversation or the assignment. I'm going to choose to do this task with reference to a musical group that I listen to that might not be, you know, what the other person is listening to, and that might give them an insight into, you know, Latino culture. And if the other person shows a certain amount of interest, then we're going to feel more connected, and we're going to feel afterwards like we have more of a relationship. And I'm going to feel, both of us are going to feel more comfortable starting new interactions and social relationships with other people who are also of different backgrounds. So I think you're totally right. The extent to which we're able to have these like little sparks of positive emotions in our interactions with people who aren't necessarily the same as us, that goes really far towards building community in a really diverse environment like UCI is.
Now, at the result of promoting a program, there is an Inclusive Excellence Certificate program where people, faculty, employees, staff employees, undergraduates, graduate students come together and really learn about the rich diversity of the UCI campus community. And I think it's so important because it builds our own capacity for understanding and ultimately caring about more people. Now, I want to turn to another question that came in that I think is particularly timing, relevant, and urgent. And it really has to do with how do we promote positive emotions when so many people have been adversely impacted by the cascade of COVID impacts. And so here's the question. With the return to work approaching, it's already upon us. Some discussion has been expressed about anxiety associated with prospective exposure to COVID. Dealing with grief subsequent to the times. How would you recommend shifting that energy to something positive? How do we cope while physically at work?
Right. I think that's such a really good question. And I certainly count myself among the people who have been wounded during this time. And so I guess my answer in really thinking about it from the science of emotions perspective is that one, we want to give it time. Because we feel anxious initially when we're back at work is not a reason to think we're always going to feel this way. And it's not a reason to think that it's an immediate crisis to be resolved. It may be more something that we need to sit with for a bit and understand, and then, let the habit of being back be part of what soothes you back into your workspace. And then when you are able to sort of come down from these more challenging spaces, then you start to make room for the positive. And for those of us who are experiencing a lot of anxiety during this time, sometimes the things that can be helpful are to do the things that you might already find soothing. Do you have a friend at work, somebody who you can connect with and who you can share some of the feelings, if you're a feeling sharing kind of person? Or do you have somebody that you can just do something with if you're not a feeling sharing kind of person, something that sort of helps you feel like it's more of a normal routine and it's safe? And then, maybe the final thing I have to say on this doesn't come from the wisdom of psychological science, but comes from the wisdom of my mother, which she says that, yes, of course we feel the sadness, but we got to try not to let it win.
Wow.
And so I think that that's really good advice.
Dr. Campos, I want to thank you so much for your time, for your research, for your insight about practicing positive emotions. I think it's a practice that we all can benefit from and practice. At this time, I'd like to hand it over to Pamela James, who will close us out.
Thank you so much, Dr. Haynes, for hosting this session, and Dr. Campos, wonderful information. I was writing notes madly, and I look forward to actually viewing this recording again. Can you remind us the name of the movie that was related to joy?
Oh, it was Inside Out. If you haven't
Inside Out,
you must see it. Yes, it was one of the few films that is actually had psychological scientists consulting on the storyline, and it comes with a beautiful, beautiful message about what role positive emotions have, but also what role negative emotions have in living a full human, connected to others life.
Wonderful. Inside Out. Thank you for that reminder and a wonderful presentation. So that's it for our series today. So here I have on the screen the previous topics that you can access on our website. And also we had 2 previous series of different topics. This was our 3rd series. So lots of resources for you. So everybody have a great afternoon. Thank you so much, Dr. Campos and Dr. Haynes. Have a great day, everyone.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you.